Welcome to Disability Empowerment Now Season 3. I'm your host, Keith Murphy Deaconcini, and today I'm talking to Anita Hollander and Reverend Rachel Hollander. Anita, welcome back to the program and welcome to your sister, Reverend Rachel Hollander.
Hi, it's great to be back. Thank you so much, Keith, for asking me to come back, and especially to bring my sister, who I adore, and who's been my partner in crime, performing my shows all over the place. And um, I'm just not only I wear my performer hat, and I also wear my National Chair of Performers with Disabilities for SAG-AFTRA hat as well. So hello, thank you, Keith.
She also wears her director and writer and composer hat and sister hat and advocate hat. And she has lots of hats, which is good because our mother likes to make hats. So she's got a hat. She's got a hat for every occasion. Hi, my name is Reverend Rachel Hollander, and I am an ordained interfaith, interspiritual minister, and a writer and a teacher and sister and performance interpreter, performance sign language interpreter, among many things. And I'm the baby, so I get to be the baby.
She is.
Rachel, I'll start with you. What made you want to become a reverend? And what was the process like becoming an interfaith reverend?
So it's interesting. We grew up in a Jewish family, and I kept finding myself sitting in temple services doing things like looking up when everybody else bowed their head, or occasionally like throwing my hand up in the air like in a hallelujah that I didn't know why I was doing it. And I also like really got bored with prayers from a book, and I wanted to I'm like, just pray, just talk. So as soon as I was able to, I started exploring other places of worship and other spiritual paths, and finding like the tie-ins and the connections, and this idea that whatever word we want to use for a larger being, larger than us, God, spirit, whatever word we want to use, it's like this big mountain, and we're all climbing it from different sides. And just because I can't see the path on the other side of the mountain doesn't make it wrong. We're all climbing it, and we're all moving towards the same thing, which is, oneness and love and peace and kindness. So I started out in a New Thought church up in Anchorage, sort of exploring this idea of connecting all the faiths. And then I found One Spirit Interfaith Seminary in New York and was like, that's my jam. And so I went through their program, and I was ordained in 2009. And it was a 2-year program, which for me was not enough. So I just kept doing their like continuing education, and I stayed involved, and I became part of the mentoring ministry. And for this last year and now this year, I'm a dean in the seminary. And so I help shepherd my little deanery of students through their first year. And we are now expanding from just interfaith to being interspiritual, which is now including social activism, anti-racism work, anti-all the isms work. And it's an exciting process. It's a great place to be. And when people say to me, well, what does that mean? What does being an interfaith minister mean? And I said, basically, it means whatever you believe doesn't matter as long as you're being kind. Just be kind.
Amen.
And yeah, and the belief doesn't matter. So I have friends who are atheists, and they're like, do I have to believe something? And I was like, no, just be a nice person. And that's good enough. That's good enough.
Yeah,
But that's my story.
didn't think I would say this, but if you just snip out the golden rule, it is probably the only passage in the Bible that can stand completely on its own, bar none.
Yeah.
So, Rachel, what got you into studying American Sign Language and performance interpreting?
Well, okay, so here's my full disclosure. There was no study involved. When I was in junior high, I started volunteering with a theater company here in Cleveland that was at that time called Fairmount Theater of the Deaf. And they would perform shows in simultaneously spoken English and sign language, incorporating the two together really creatively. And so at 14, I was like, I'm all in. This is great. Um, However, it was mostly signed English. And so after 3 or 4 years of hanging out with them, they started introducing ASL, and I was like, too scary, and I ran away. And many years later, I came back, and when I auditioned for the theater company, they said, what do you remember? And I said, I remember turtle, I remember tree, and I remember my name is, and I could spell my name. And they were like, okay, here we go. And so for the first 3 weeks of rehearsals with a deaf director who did not speak, and 3 other actors, 2 deaf, 1 hearing, 10 hours a day. Um, by the end of the first 3 months, I was conversant. And by the end of the first year with the theater company, I became the company interpreter. So it was kind of like moving to Paris to learn French. I was living and breathing 24/7 deaf culture, and I stayed with them for 8 years.
That's incredible. So, sign language was actually my first language. I did not speak until I was 7. I learned a abbreviated ASL, so English is actually my second language. And the
Awesome.
only thing I remember from that time,
The most important sign.
yeah, the most important son. And then you factor in that I'm very much a old school hopeless romantic, and then it becomes even better. And so English is actually my second language. So Anita, since the last time we talked, I snuck on the board of the theater breaking through barriers, which is how we met. I don't know why it said snuck on. You can't sneak on to a non-profit board. Nick, if you're listening, I'm sorry. So, so we talked so much about last time about the process of accessible theater and writing accessible musicals, that I thought it was only fair that we bring on your sister to continue that conversation, because like every good interview, if we run out of time and we're having so much fun talking about other things, there's always another interview. So, picking up where we left off, I'm, I just blanked out. Yeah, yeah.
Well, I know that you first saw Spectacular
Yes,
Fall.
yes.
I don't think you saw Still Standing.
No, no, I didn't. And I kept going back to Spectacular Falls, not only for kids on Cornelia Street, which is something I will always mention, always be envious of, and always wish I could somehow steal from you creatively. Uh, but also the humor of one of the opening songs where you say or you sing that it only takes a banana peel away. And I'm like, that is brilliant. It's so commonplace and something so innocuous can cause disability. And so, what was it like writing the humor aspect of Spectacular Folds and also combining it with very serious subject matter?
I think that that has always been my maybe my skill, which is well, coming from a family with Black humor as our basis. I mean, we could make a joke out of anything. On car trips, long car. I know Rachel knows what's coming. On car trips, we would all sing. And there were four girls, my mom and my dad, and we would sing. And but we would make up medleys. And one of our medleys was the blood medley. So we would inject musical theater songs with the word blood, like the hills are alive with the sound of blood, stuff like that. And every musical theater song we could come up with, we would inject the word blood. So okay, there's somebody at our door. This happens a lot. But anyway, so here's what I thought. When I became disabled, one of the first funny moments was when Rachel saw that everyone knew I had lost my leg back when I lost my leg in 1982, which was my second time of having cancer. So the family had gotten used to the fact that I had had cancer. We had all dealt with that, the wig falling off, things like that. But 5 years later, when I lost my leg, we had a Passover Seder, and Rachel, the youngest of us, said to us, she came in and I was taking my leg off, for the Seder. And she said, oh, I was looking for a slipper. And she said, what size foot do you wear? And suddenly went, oh, I don't know why I said that. Oh my God. And I burst out laughing because that was like joke number one. That was going to be joke number one for all time. So coming from a family with a sense of humor like that, who can make anything funny, it was a natural progression that all the songs I would start writing about my experience, there would be very few serious ballads. But the most important thing to me was if an audience can laugh, if you can make an audience laugh, they're going to settle in and listen to what you have to say. This was true on the stage of the improvisation, the comedy club, the improvisation. If I had got up on stage, first I would wear both legs, but when I was pregnant, I had to get up on stage on one leg. And the owner of the club, Silver Friedman, Bud Friedman's wife, I said, can I go up on stage on one leg? Pregnant, one-legged woman getting up on stage at a comedy club as the opening music act. And she was like, I don't care how many legs you have. You're great. You just get on stage. And she'd throw me on stage. Here I'd be on one stage, on one leg, pregnant and singing. And the men in the audience were like into it. They were like, whoa, this was like this fantasy thing. But the women in the audience would sort of like go like this. Because here's this one-legged woman on stage. I mean, this went long after the pregnancy was over and I had lost the baby weight and I wore sexy outfits. And they were like this because to them, it was not, it was an uncomfortable thing. But as soon as I made the audience laugh with the first song, the men were like laughing away, but the women like put their hand down and started feeling more comfortable and watching. Many of the women were in their 30s, many were my age at that time. And I could understand their discomfort there, but for the grace of God, as we say. They put their hand down and they started to laugh. And by the third song, everybody was cheering and, like they were having a great time. And that was Silver's idea, that I warmed the audience up. I warmed the crowd up to laugh at the comics. So I had to be funny. So I was writing songs like Paper Napkins, a song about writing songs on paper napkins. But when I would cry, they'd get all snotty and mucusy and, I'd lose the lyric and stuff like that. I mean, I had songs like that and made fun of other composers sometimes and things like that. But so when I went to do my show, the first show was still standing, and I was going to walk on stage at the beginning of the show on two legs. And after a brief little intro, just a few lines of singing, I was going to take off my leg and sing about the advantages of having one leg. Well, in 1993, when I first did this on a stage, it was quite shocking, not to me. I mean, I threw it over my shoulder and made everybody laugh. Once they got over that, they then were comfortable and they could hear all the serious things. If I had had my way, Keith, my show would be all comedy with no seriousness. And there was a song in Still Standing, and I'm sure you will go and watch the video or listen to the album. But there's a song in the right smack in the middle of the show, after everybody's been laughing and having a great time. There's the darker section of the show, the first song being about the pain, which still has humor in it, because the way I describe the pain, my nerve pain, is pretty funny, actually. But then it gets into this serious place of, this is serious. But everybody's laughing, and it just like turns a corner, like, like putting on the brakes on a car.
Of course, the darker section of the show is my favorite. But
this is what I'm getting at, Rachel. This is where I'm going with this. It goes to the main song after the pain, is a song called The Choice. It was the very first song I ever wrote. And it was a challenge by a professor at Carnegie Mellon who said, we hear you sing songs by James Taylor and Joni Mitchell and Carole King and Carly Simon and all that, but we never learn anything about you. You've just gone through cancer. You're on chemotherapy. I was in college when that first operation happened. She was like, but we didn't learn anything about you. Just had this cataclysm and you're still having chemo and radiation, and we know nothing about that world. All we know is you're a great singer, great piano player, and that's entertaining, but you just went through something major. And I said to her, what, do you want me to write my own songs? And she was like, yeah. So that night I wrote the song The Choice and came back to spite her, to stop her from ever suggesting that I should write any songs. It was the song The Choice, which is about what it feels like at 3 a.m. when you don't know, your life is hanging in the balance. You just realized you had cancer. You didn't really know it. You don't know if under the cast is your left leg or if it's not there. And this is just them trying to help you understand that you now don't have a left leg. Because at that point, I didn't know what was going on. And nobody told you things in 1977. So that could have been a fake cast, because my nerves had been severed. So I didn't know if I had a left leg or not. So I wrote this song about what it felt like to be all alone at 3 o'clock in the morning. Couldn't call a friend, no, and the radio is playing love songs, and like that's sort of like smooth listening kind of things. And you're like, this doesn't compute. Well, I sang it to her the next morning at 8 a.m. thinking, and I said, so what do you think? And she goes, well, that's what I was talking about. That's the exact song. that you needed. And that became the cornerstone of what 16 years later would be the show Still Standing. It went through different phases, but it ended up being that song. And at one point during the years that I was performing the show, after it had become a show, it had become an album, I had premiered it at Don't Tell Mama Cabaret, which was an odd place to premiere a show, a musical about such serious subjects. But at a certain point, I took it out of the show because I was like, this is whining. This is serious. This is just too serious for this show. I don't want people to cry. I want people to laugh. Well, that was a mistake. It belonged in the show because people kept saying, Anita, if we don't know where you've been, then we don't appreciate the story very much. You know, we can laugh at funny things, but if we don't know that you went through serious pain and suffering, then we think, well, it was easy for her, but it's not for me. And like what Rachel just said is that it's her favorite song. I can't tell you how many people come up to me after the show and say, that 3 a.m. song, it's that 3 a.m. I've been there. And they didn't have cancer and they just had been there. But it's funny that a side story is that I had entered that song in the Billboard songwriting contest in around 78. And the response from Billboard was, because in those days in the contest, they would send you a recorded feedback on a cassette tape. And my recorded feedback about the choice was, when you're writing a song, you really need to be able to be earnest and, you know, and really go be, you know, they thought it was a song about losing my boyfriend. Can you imagine a song about 3 a.m. having cancer? I never said the word cancer in the song. I just said, this is what it feels like at 3 a.m. And it's a song that all over the world, people have related to that song as themselves at 3 o'clock in the morning with no one to call and feeling depressed. But in 1978, it wasn't an acceptable popular song because it was like, you know, this is, you know, you really need to, it has to come from the heart.
Well, and can I jump in on something here? Because, so there are two songs, Keith, in the middle of the show. There's The Pain and The Choice. And they are my two favorite songs to interpret. Well, they're my two favorite songs, and they're my favorite songs to interpret. And not just because I was there and because I lived this with her. It's because I live with depression. And those songs have meaning for me as somebody who lives with depression and physical pain. So when she sings The Pain, it's very hard for me to interpret that song without crying, because I'm living that as well in a totally different realm than she wrote it. And the same with The Choice. I had my 3 a.m. moment. I have had a few 3 a.m. moments where it's like, when you're living with depression, you have to make that choice every day. You know, am I going to stay? Am I not going to stay? Is today worth it? Is it not worth it? And so for me, you know, I love the humor, and there's a song in the show where she actually becomes me, and I'm interpreting her being me, which is very meta, and we have a lot of fun with it. However, it's those two songs that, and I can see the audience, like as I'm interpreting, I can see them just connecting in. So my vote, those two songs.
Yes. And just to add one more thing is at the very end of the show, after the triumphant song, Here I Stand, which is about, well, I'm still here. And that's the point. After that song is like it's called the epilogue, because to me, I was afraid that a song like Here I Stand would make the audience feel, well, she did it, but that's her. She's just built that way. But epilogue was literally related to the young man composer who inspired me to make all these songs into a show for his sake, because he was dying of AIDS. And he wanted a checklist of tools of how to survive, tools for survival. And that's what Still Standing is, a toolkit for survival. surviving life's catastrophes. And so the epilogue is there was this person named Michael, and he said, how do you get from there, here I stand, to here? How did you get from, no, sorry, how did you get from there, cancer, to here I stand? How did you get from there to here? And I wanted the audience to know this is why this show exists, is that I tried to figure out how. Sense of humor, imagination, family, love, chutzpah, all those things were in each of the songs. So after, oh my gosh, I'm sorry, podcast in my living room. There's a phone ringing. But anyway, besides that fact, I wanted the audience to know that it's just about just be here. Do whatever you can, but just to be here. And people relate to that one because it's a dark song. It tells about, it's like, and 2 months later, Michael died. I mean, yeah. And I didn't know if I had been able to help him survive because he listened to everything, but he still died. And I was going on with this feeling of, how can I help the people in the audience? How can I help those who are still struggling? And Rachel, you wanted to say something.
I was just going to say, and for the record, that is actually my favorite song in the show, because I love Michael so much. And little shameless plug. I'm going to do a little shameless plug. I actually took the lyric from that show, and that's the title of my book. From There to Here, An Insider's Guide to Navigating Depression, Navigating the Darkness. And Michael is in my book from when he sent me a letter saying, these are all the questions I have about living with depression. Answer them for me. And so Anita and I share this beautiful connection with this wonderful human who lives in the ethers. And that song, that song is definitely my first favorite, because like Anita, when people see me today and they're like, wow, you don't seem depressed at all. Like, are you healed? Are you cured? And when I published the book, people were like, oh, so you published this book because you're over it? And it's like, no, I published this book because I'm showing you that you can live with it as opposed to not living with it. So you get from there to here multiple times a day. From there to here is this ongoing living process of hour by hour, minute by minute. So yeah, that song is very powerful. And after the triumphant, here I stand moment, it brings the audience right back in super close. And so when the show ends, there's just this, now I get the message.
Yes.
So, and interpreting that is such a beautiful thing, because there's a sign choice that I choose at the end of the song that sort of leaves it ethereally going off into the air. And I just gave myself goosebumps. So it's a beautiful combining of the arts.
If anyone's listening to this podcast, you can go online and look for Still Standing, Anita Hollander epilogue. And I think you'll be able to hear the song because there's a YouTube version of it. But it is something that people, it's like bringing it down. And even in South Korea, in Seoul, where everybody's first language was Korean, and even the deaf interpreters, they were interpreting in Korean, Korean Sign Language. And then there was America. There was like so many interpretations going on, but people loved that last song. They felt something, and they, through the interpreters, all told me that, without that last song, they would have missed something. They would have missed, as Rachel said, the connection. This is true. And I want to throw one last thing in before you ask another intelligent question. Keith, you always have great questions, and I'm getting in your way. But I'd like to dedicate today's podcast to a rabbi whose birthday it is today, but he is long gone. He left his earthly coil a while ago, but his name is Rabbi David Haken. And when you think about, I always think of myself as a positive person. And when I think of positive people, he was one of those people who just, his smile would light up a room. And he had a family connection that for some reason he kept being the author of changes and things that happened and how we met people and all this stuff. So I just want to put that out there that we both dedicate this to him.
Thank you. So, was the language accessibility always microphones about to fall?
Oh, no.
Yeah. I love it when it does that mid-recording.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's like me and my bells and whistles going on everywhere.
So was language accessibility always a part of still standing spectacular falls and the third the third musical that you're writing, Anita, and how did the language accessibility arrive?
Wow. As I say, you always ask incredible questions. Language.
Check is in the mail. No.
No, I love it. That's why I like doing interviews with you, because there are questions I get asked a lot. And then there are the unique ones that you always seem to find. Language and sensibility. Whew,
Language accessibility.
accessibility. Sorry, thank you for qualifying. Language accessibility. So at a certain point of doing Here Still Standing, I thought it was important that if I was going to do a show about disability, that it needed to be physically accessible. There had to be a way to get into the theater, and there had to be a way for my deaf colleagues to be able to come and see the show. And instead of having one performance that most people probably, who knows if that's a good day for them. I thought, well, here I have a sister who is like incredible at signing, at interpreting, not just interpreting language, but interpreting theater, because she did go to Juilliard and get the theater interpretation training. So when she told you she had no training, that was she had no initial training to be an interpreter. That is true. But she went to Juilliard. By the way, she was ordained at the Riverside Church. So my sister, a person who doesn't live in New York, only lived here for a very short time. She's actually shown up in the biggest places. But here was Juilliard giving this wonderful course. Candace,
Candace Brooker-Penn.
Candace Brooker-Penn as Stephanie Fain.
Alan Champion.
The best interpreters in the business. We're teaching interpreters how to interpret theater, which of course helped to inform her work in Cleveland with Cleveland Sign Stage, which Fairmount Theater of the Deaf turned into Cleveland Sign Stage. And all of this stuff morphed together, and she came here and studied at Juilliard. So I have a sister who can interpret theater. Well, because of her work with Cleveland Sign Stage, they asked me to come and do a gala performance of Still Standing at the Cleveland Playhouse, which was fun because as a child, I was in their children's apprentice program, and I did a show there with Peter Ostrom, who was Charlie in Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory, the first movie. A little bit of trivia. But at any rate, this was my homecoming back to the Cleveland Playhouse. But if it was going to be a benefit for a deaf theater company, we'd better have it interpreted. And there was Rachel with Joan, her cohort interpreter. And while I did the show, still standing, over in the corner was Joan and Rachel doing the show. I mean, performing my show. It was hard for me to do the show and not watch them because I was fascinated that the show they were doing seemed almost more interesting to me than my own show. And
wait, I just have to jump in on that. So when we translate a show, we write something called a gloss, which is, English to ASL. And Anita wanted to see my gloss. And I said, no, because Anita is notorious for having difficulties remembering lyrics. And I was afraid she was going to start singing the gloss. So I would not show her the gloss.
Exactly. Her scripts for my shows do not have my lyrics. They have her interpretation of the lyrics, how to do it in ASL, which is not the same grammatical structure. And, songs rhyme and all that stuff. Well, if you watch Russell Harvard sometimes do some of his videos, I love watching him because it's like the meaning of the song is what's important, what grows, all these things. And I'm seeing some of the signing I'm learning, but at the same time, he's interpreting it his way. And that's what Rachel has always done. So they did it. And when I thought about it, I thought, if I'm going to tour this show, I want deaf audience members. Now, okay, I'm going to say something that your deaf audience is going to be pissed at me, but sometimes they don't show up for the show. It's like, come on, people, I'm doing this for you. But whether they showed up or not, I want to be ready. I want to be able to say my show runs from this date to this date, and you can come any night to the show. And it will be interpreted so that you will be able to understand what's going on in the show. And those who have come have really enjoyed it. And I think because we choreograph it so that sometimes she's shadowing right next to me, sometimes she's over on stage right and I'm stage left because I'm dancing around and stuff. But as we've gone on, when we moved into Spectacular Falls, it was a lot more incorporated. So that she's next to me, she's behind me, she's, wherever. So that at some point we actually look at each other. There's this, you've seen the show, the song about 9/11, the towers. At the end of that song, we're so close to each other. And then we watch what happened on 9/11. At the end of the song, there's a musical moment where we both are remembering we are both in that moment. And hopefully the third show, which is going to be called Balance, a Footnote, which is sort of like to bring together what I've learned and hopefully about wisdom I've gained over the time that I've written these shows. I want to keep exploring that kind of thing. Now, I couldn't take her to Korea with me, which was sad, but they did budget for me to go business class, so I can't complain. But fortunately, and I told Rachel this, fortunately, the Korean interpreters were artists, and art is so important in Korea, particularly South Korea. I've never been to North Korea, so I don't know, but art is funded, and it's so important that these interpreters were sensitive people. They couldn't speak English. They couldn't understand me when I spoke English to them. But through an interpreter, the Korean interpreter who stood behind me for the song, the epilogue, he didn't know Michael. He didn't know anything about my life. But afterwards, he told me through an interpreter, he said, I'm so sorry, but I could not help crying. I couldn't help myself. I mean, he felt that he had damaged the performance because he was crying. He was interpreting the song with such emotional connection to it. He said, I couldn't help it. And I am very sorry. It was like out of respect for me. And I was like, no, you don't understand. My sister usually does this. And we weep when we sing this song and he said, I didn't know Michael. And I'm like, but you kind of do know Michael. If you felt what you felt, then you knew Michael. And this connection made me understand, back to your point about making the show accessible, making language that I'm speaking into a universal language is the aim and has been the goal ever since Rachel first interpreted the show at the Playhouse, when I said, I don't like doing the show without her. Fortunately, I get to go back to Cleveland and do stuff. So she's there, but she's come to Boston to do it up in Concord, Massachusetts. We've done it in Canton, Ohio. We've done it in New York.
Virginia.
Oh my gosh. In Virginia at the and actually the video of Spectacular Falls in Virginia is the best video of any performance, I think, any live performance I've ever done, and really worth seeing. Because we got to see what the show really looks like, with beautiful lighting and a great designer who just like designed as a set from just hearing the show for one night only, at the Reston Performing Arts Center, thanks to Paul Douglas McNevich, who is a sensitive soul on every level, a director, and not just the curator of the season, but a great director who directed me at the Kennedy Center doing John Belusso's play, Gretty Goodtime. And again, Paul brought on board these incredible designers, and that was all shadow signed. So Keith, it's not just my shows, but at the Kennedy Center, we did John Belusso's play, Gretty Goodtime. John Belusso is the most famous of disabled playwrights, who unfortunately died suddenly at the age of 36, but had already created an oeuvre. You know, he has a collection of plays that speak to the disabled experience, but in the most dramatic and amazing and funny ways. And I had Susan Karshmer as my shadower, and there was an Asian American interpreter for the Asian American actress, and each person had their shadow signer who was tailor-made for them and their character and their cultural background. And because Gretty Goodtime, the play by John Belusso, it's about a woman who existed in the 1950s, had polio, but before Salk, just before Salk created the vaccine. So, and nobody knew what to do with this 30-year-old vital young woman who was severely disabled, and they put her in a nursing home. And she watches TV all day, even though she's smart and she's funny and she wants a life. She watches and she sees a thing about Hiroshima. And she starts to imagine a friend, a woman, one of the Hiroshima maidens. So there was a Japanese character in the play, and the two of them, they go on this journey that helps Gretty to find herself and to stand, well, she couldn't stand up, but to stand up for herself and say, I need a life beyond this friggin' nursing home. And the doctor helps her to escape, basically. And a fascinating show, but with all of these multicultural characters and multicultural interpreters, it was amazing. So and Science Stage was doing that all the time. The plays that they did, they went on tour with Treasure Island and things like that. And I mean, sorry, I call my sister my daughter's name. It's just the way it happens. But with Rachel on tour with a deaf company, she has all kinds of adventures to talk about. At one point, Science Stage linked with Deaf West or one of the other companies, and Troy Kotzer was there. So there's a picture where
He
Troy,
was with NTD. This was in 1993.
National Theater of the Deaf, right?
National Theater of the Deaf was doing a production of Ophelia, and it was a world premiere. And for the first time in the history of all of the deaf theaters, this was before Deaf West. It
Oh,
was NTD, Sunshine 2, and Fairmont Theater of the Deaf. We were all together. And there's this great picture of us. And that was the first time I ever saw Troy. So that was 31 years ago. And he blew my mind. I was like, this guy is amazing. There was something I was going to say, though, about what you were talking about.
the shadow signing or the diversity or
Oh, about Treasure Island. I got to play 5 male pirates in an hour.
and this is true. Rachel's been able to do Shakespeare, playing all these wonderful roles in Shakespeare. Now that she's interpreting for Great Lakes Shakespeare, she's getting to play roles that she hadn't played. You can talk more about that, but from
yeah, I've been able to play roles that I'll never get cast in. I've been Hamlet twice. I've been Burr and Washington and Hamilton.
Yes.
Hadestown, Book of Mormon.
This is because Rachel interprets national tours that come through Cleveland. And when she was up in Anchorage, when she lived in Alaska, she would interpret the tours, the national tours that came through many different cities, actually. She's done that. But in Cleveland, she may have been the first interpreter of Hamilton, because
we're not sure.
In New York, I spoke to the interpreters, and it was so soon after the tour went out. They were saying to me, no, I don't know who has been an interpreter on the show yet. So they were like saying, can we have your notes? Like, what did Rachel do? Oh my gosh. And Hamilton has so many characters like whirling around, and she had to learn the whole show in 11 days. The whole show.
The first time
they told her she was going to interpret it.
The first time it came through Cleveland was 2019, and I had not even listened to it yet. I hadn't even heard the show. And they said, well, we've got a request.
They thought it was just a fad that was going to just come and go like everything else.
Yeah, it would just be there for
so long.
Yeah, and I'm fad resistant. So like if anything's super popular, I'm like, eh. So I hadn't even listened to it, and we got this request, and they said it's in 11 days. And yeah, so I started listening to I downloaded the album, and I listened to it 24/7 while I slept, in the shower, while I drove. I didn't even look at the script. I just kept listening and listening and listening. And there were only 2 of us to interpret the show, which is insane. If you ever do Hamilton, please request more than 2 interpreters. And so I knew I was going to be Burr. I knew I was going to be Washington. I wanted to be Mulligan because his signs are so big, and I got to sign like Mulligan. And I wanted to be Angelica. And so the other interpreter picked up everything else, and it was insanity. The second time we did it was a little better because we had a little bit of a foundation. So yeah, it's an adventure, and it's always different. It's always different. And having been an actor has prepared me to be a better theatrical interpreter, because now I know, like with Great Lakes, when we were interpreting Julius Caesar, and I had this idea for what Brutus meant in one of his signs, but I wasn't sure if that's what the actor was meaning. And I got to talk with him about it. I got to actually sit with the actor and go, okay, so I'm translating this line, and I'm thinking that you're thinking this. And he was like, actually, no, I'm thinking. And so we got to collaborate so that I wasn't interpreting incorrectly. I got to actually translate his thoughts. With Hamlet, I'm a little more stubborn. I love Hamlet. It's my favorite show to interpret. And oftentimes I will just do what I want, which is bad. So don't put that out on the podcast. Nobody heard that. Nobody heard that.
But that's true also in my shows, because sometimes Rachel will say, well, when you say that, what exactly are you meaning? Like the song Share the World, where I actually interpret this. At that point in the show, I give Rachel a break in Spectacular Falls. And you've seen this, Keith. I give Rachel a break, Rachel's hands a break. And then I sit on a stool instead of dancing around the stage. And instead of singing, I also give my voice a break. My children's choir comes over the sound system singing Share the World, which is a song about immigrants, how we are all immigrants. And that when she helped me to understand how to interpret it, I had to realign my thinking in the fact that this is ASL, this is not English. So, some of it is a bit Englishy, but then there's other things where she taught me how to make something happen. But it was good that I wasn't singing it, but rather in my head, speaking ASL in my head, like, if we help each other, what? We can share the world. That's not the lyric. Is like a helping hand can make change and help us share the world. But it's like if we help each other, what? Well, we can change the world or share the world. Anyways, the kids of the children's choir, I taught them how to sign it. And in the middle of that, the kids wanted to say welcome in all of the languages that their families immigrated from, that their families came from. So their ancestors, because these were kids aged 6 through 16 or 18. And so their assignment was to go home and find out what countries they came from. And in the middle of the song, we said the word welcome in all the languages. So when I went to sign it, I decided it would be best to sign just the sign word for the country, so that anyone who was deaf in the audience, instead of trying to sign the word welcome in those languages, because I don't know sign language in Chinese and sign language in Hungarian or Bulgarian or whatever, Russian. But instead of that, we signed the country signs so that they would know we were doing this. These were the different countries that the kids all came from, and that that as immigrants came from all these places. It's not just about Ukraine. It's not just about Mexico. It's not just, but that all of us here came from somewhere, except of course the Native Americans who were Native Americans. But at any rate, I know I lost the train of thought, but it's the idea that we went from just her over here signing a show and me doing performing the show, to us collaborating throughout the show. So that and I do understand that a lot of times that's not the way it's supposed to be, that interpreters are interpreters and that's it. They're over here and the deaf people sit in that area so that they can watch the show, but also see the interpreters right there. I totally understand that, but they are separate. In my show, because so often Rachel is a part of my life that's being sung about, like in Still Standing, the song Lazy Day, which Rachel was referring to, is a song that I sing as her, and the sound system has me talking to her. So it's me talking to myself, but Rachel's interpreting it. So I thought, why would she sit over there? She's actually, the person. So it just began to be more interactive. But my feeling is, if theater could be more interactive, and Grady Goodtime was interactive, that we can do, and that Playwrights Horizons, they tried the experiment of I Was Most Alive with You, the Craig
Lucas
play that was written for Russell Harvard. They had deaf actors on an upper level and Russell deaf actor with the hearing actors downstairs. It was an experiment, But me, I say, let's get us all together and see what we create. And I know there's other shows that are experimenting and have always been experimenting with it. But
And I know, Keith, you haven't gotten a question in for a really long time, but I want
Nope.
to add, I want to add to that with Sign Stage, it was always very creatively done because it was spoken English and sign language on the same stage. Sometimes we were simcomming, which is signing and speaking at the same time, although we tried to avoid that. But sometimes that happened. But similar to Russell's show, when we did Glass Menagerie, the set on the floor was the deaf actors. And then the hearing actors who voiced them were sitting up in a bar. It was set up as a bar above the stage where Tom would be in both worlds. So Tom would go to his home and then he would come up to the bar and hang out with the voice actors. And so we bridged the gap there. With Miracle Worker, we had shadow interpreters. So I was with Annie Sullivan the whole time, just following her around. The interpreter for Captain Keller in Miracle Worker was actually a deaf man who was his shadow interpreter. And so he had visual cues. The actor playing Captain Keller, the hearing actor playing Captain Keller, would do visual cues to let Aaron know where he was in the line. I'm going to pick up the glass here. I'm going to turn my shoulder here. So Aaron could be right with him. So there are so many creative ways to use interpreters. There's also straight up, a lecture. You don't want to interact with the interpreter in a lecture, or mostly in a comedy show. My rule is don't talk to me. However, with theater and with music, there is the possibility of this beautiful collaboration that I think is possible. Okay, Keith, we're going to let you ask a question.
Thank you. So, Rachel, when was the first time you noticed your older sister's brilliance, and how did her brilliance motivate you?
Oh, that's a very interesting question.
Please elaborate.
Two very interesting questions. When did I notice and when did it inspire? So we sang together as children. There's a picture of us on a local talent show called Jean Carroll, where I was 4. So that made Lisa 7, Anita 10 or 11, and Celia 13. And Anita was always our director. She was the big sister. She took charge. She was our spokesperson. And
I was not the oldest, but I was the front man, basically.
she was the bossy pants. And we all were doing theater as well. My first time on a stage was in Fiddler on the Roof, where Anita played Chava and I played Bielka. So I always looked at her as like, wow, this is somebody who just goes up on stage. I think I can go up on stage too. And so that was kind of that's what got me to New York when I lived in New York for a hot minute in the 80s. I went there to go to performing arts school because Anita did it. I'm sure I can do it. Not so much. However, in those 3 years, I got to perform with Anita at 88's and the Duplex and Don't Tell Mama. I got to meet people who are now creating all of the musical theater on Broadway and sing their songs. I got to meet Michael, our beloved Michael. So in those short 3 years, I really got a flavor for what her life was like. And I knew that wasn't my life. So it was like, well, good on ya, you know. Inspiration wise, and we're going to go a little dark here. Are you ready? Here we go. We're going to go a little dark. While I lived in New York for those short 3 years, I was hospitalized in a psych unit for 5.5 months for depression. And it was a bit of a debacle. And Anita would come see me pretty much every day. And one of the nurses, my beloved Georgie, actually had to tell her, you need to stop coming. Because I looked at Anita as this courageous, powerful, vibrant human being who lives on one leg, who survived cancer twice, And instead of seeing that as a goal, I was constantly comparing myself. And so the depression was getting worse because I just felt so lousy about myself. I'm not like Anita. I'm not strong like Anita. I can't do what she did. Why am I living? And so while Anita was coming there every day and showing me so much love, I was sliding down into a pit that they couldn't get me out of. And so they had to lovingly and firmly say, you have to stop visiting your sister.
That was so painful. I just want to throw that in there. It was for me because I didn't know the other side of it. Why? I was just like, why are you telling me, Georgie, who we all loved, why are you telling me what do you mean I can't come and visit my sister? Now I'll shut up. But it was painful.
Yeah. And I write about that in my book as well, where it was so difficult to see my sister as this amazing inspiration and to also weaponize that. Her inspiration became a weapon against me that I was using on myself. And so as I've worked on healing and as I've learned to navigate this life of going in and out of the darkness, now when I interpret her shows, people will say to me, wow, your sister's such an inspiration. And I can actually embrace that and say, yeah, you think, and there's no comparison. And I think part of that revelation for me came from interpreting songs like The Pain and the Choice, which was my revelation, my realization, wow, I also was there and I'm also here. I'm also still standing. I'm also still living. Okay. That's the message is there are going to be times that are dark as hell. And those times don't last forever. And then you can write a song about them and you can move forward and you can look back on those and go, okay, like I like to say, in times when I still slip, I had a really rough December. And I remind myself every day, you have 100% success rate of survival, Rachel. You have 100% success rate. So lean on that. Lean on that accolade. I have 100% success rate of living. So yeah, so now her inspiration, now she's very inspiring to me. And it was an interesting journey that inspiration took.
But of course, she inspires me too, because Rachel has actually literally talked people off ledges. She has, well, it still to me sounds like, it's like has the ability to talk someone out of jumping. And she did this at a hotel, someone she didn't know. So she inspires me. And plus, she just adds, and she writes her own songs too. And she has a really beautiful voice, which people know this about. And when she started writing songs, she's come a really long way with her songwriting. It has gotten richer and deeper. So I think we go a little back and forth on that inspiration thing.
I'm so glad I asked that question because that got to the meat and potatoes of the episode. Have you two, the musical dynamic duo that you are, ever thought of co-writing a musical together after Anita finishes her third personal musical?
I think the danger of that, Keith, is we're both a little bit of bossy pantses.
So it's my co-host next season, just plugging that in there. But yeah, no, I can appreciate that. Although I'm also a musician in one of my other lives, one of my other jobs, and I've always loved collaboration because I can't write music. I can write lyrics, no problem. I was born a poet, I will die a poet. But music, it's just beyond me. And so that collaborative nature, so that's probably out of a long shot. Anita, have you ever thought of writing your own autobiography or your own memoir? Yes, you can see the shows as your autobiography, but have you ever thought about following in your sister's footsteps and writing your own book?
Yeah, that's interesting. Even Michael, the last time I visited Michael before he died, he said, Anita, stop writing musicals, write a book. He had stacks of books on his coffee table. I mean, he was very ill. He had these stacks, Gilda Radner, all these various books about people going through a struggle and surviving or not, like Gilda. But what they did and how he said, a book is what people need. Nobody needs a musical. Stop writing your musicals and write a book. That's what you need to do. And this was 1990, 1991. I mean, that's like a lot of years ago. So that was the first person who did that. I have a social worker that I talk to, like to go deal with stuff, and we're dealing with some issues, medical issues here at home. And she was like, when are you gonna write a book about this? I mean, you have like so many things. And I think when Rachel's book came out, I was like, I don't have the patience. I have a lot of energy to write musicals because I love sitting at a piano and figuring it out, and just like letting it just pour out of me. That comes naturally. But and I'm a good writer. I'm actually a good writer, but I've written speeches and I've written like lectures and things like, but to sit down and put it all together. And it's funny because this particular social worker has said, part of my other job is I work with authors, we could work on this. Then I thought, my most recent thought is that Balance, a Footnote, which is the title of my third show, that perhaps in a way that may end up being my book, end up being the book. Karen Manheim, wonderful actress who right now is on Law and Order, the reboot of Law and Order. She's, I think, the police chief, maybe. Wonderful actress who fluently signs ASL. Back
No
when we
way.
Oh, totally. She's an expert at it. But back in 1992, when she and I did Wojciech at the Public Theater with Joanne Echolitis directing, I met Cameron on the first day. I was a little intimidated. She was such a strong woman. She rode a motorcycle to work and she had leather and some chains. I mean, she was imposing. But then the moment we had our first conversation, she was like this kitten. She was the sweetest human being. And then I found out that she'd worked with the Deaf Theater Company and she signed, but she had written a one-woman show called something like I'm Fat, Hey, I'm Fat, or something like that.
Wake up, I'm fat.
And it was a one-woman show, not a musical, but a show, which at 11 p.m. at night at the Public, they would show people's like experimental things. So we would do a performance of Wojciech, and at 11 o'clock, she was doing her show upstairs in one of the smaller theaters, studio spaces. And that became her book. And, shortly after, when she did The Practice, when she got the TV series, The Practice, which was kind of her big Hollywood break anyway, she put that show as the book. And so that is what I've been thinking, because Still Standing is in a book, is published. It's published in a book called, it has a really long title, but I always forget the name of the book, but it's the connection of disability and theater, and it's an anthology of theater where disability and theater meet. I'm really mad that I cannot think of this book that my play is in, but they have the full text of Still Standing in, which has been really great because people can go and find it and read the show. So I think eventually you're right. It has to go into a book, everything.
So that's an interesting point, because I was just about to say compiling Still Standing, Spectacular Falls, and Balance of Footnotes, even though those are musicals and you can include all the music into the book itself, it would be a multimedia book. That is basically the memoir, which is not like any other memoir or autobiography that a person would read, but that would be, late to me, very true to who you are, Anita, creatively. And that's a book that I would buy 30 copies easily and give to my friends as Christmas gifts. It would just be astounding. So you've basically already written your autobiography. You just have to compile it all, put the CDs together, maybe re-record a few songs, and then publish it. So there's that idea.
It's a great idea. The Primary Stages Theater, Casey Childs is doing an audio, well, is doing video interviews to do the history of Off-Broadway. And it's this wonderful, amazing compiling of people like Austin Pendleton and Joanne Acolytis and all of the people who created Off-Broadway and who have moved it along. And he's including me in this. So we've spent hours of interviewing like this. And I realized in preparing for those and in speaking my history in Off-Broadway and in theater in general, I realized I have the beginnings of an autobiography already written as far as my life in the theater. And it's also that people can click and see me talk about it. But it also reminded me that all these things, my shows and that interviews and stuff like that, helps me organize my thoughts to put something out like that. And I think that I would want to do that. I once pursued children's book publishing to do Mommy is a Mermaid, which is a song from Still Standing, as an illustrated children's book with the song as a CD at the end. You know, nowadays CDs not a thing anymore, but and I had a young artist
bring them back.
Well, yes.
Glory, Anita, you can
Yes.
do anything.
Well, I had this young artist start doing some beautiful illustrations, and I submitted them to a publisher, and they were like, well, we do young people's books. That's what we do, but we don't do actual picture books of children's books with songs. But she said, but there is a market for that if you can find the people who do it. I was like, well, that's not helping me much, you know, but I do eventually want that.
I wanted to jump back in just for a second to go back to your question about collaborating, Keith, because so there are times when I forget all the things that I've done in my life. And that's part of the problem, is like there are moments when I'm like, oh yeah, I did that. And I actually do have a one-woman show about my experience of living with depression called Choose Again, A Journey to Wholeness. And a really awesome
Great
idea.
title.
Thank you. Thank you. And I've always, like, one really great idea would be for Anita and I to collaborate on an evening of our shows. So she could do one of her shows and I could interpret, and then I could do Choose Again and she could interpret that. Or we could get, an interpreter in to interpret that. But the idea of, I did submit it once to United Solo Artists and I did not get chosen, which is okay, but I've done it a few times. I did it for a NAMI, National Alliance of Mental Illness Conference. And the cool thing about the show that I've created is that it evolves, because when I first created it, I thought I was healed. And so it was a little bit egotistical and a little bit, I'm all over depression. I'm done with it. And so since then it has evolved to continue the story. But so I wanted to get back to that just because I was like, oh, wait a minute, we could collaborate. We could do an evening of Hollander stories.
Yeah, and it wouldn't have to be whole show. It could be pieces that tell a history, that could even tell our own history through our own journeys. I mean, that's good idea, Rach. Good idea, Keith. See, this is what Keith's magic is all about. Yes, folks, if you're listening out there, keep listening to Keith, because he's the idea man.
Well, I will try not to let that go to my ego.
Oh, let it go. Let it in there.
So, if there are any advocates or performers just starting out on their professional journeys, listening or watching art, what would be some action steps that each of you would impart to them?
I can say, Rachel was just about to say something. Okay. There's a young actress named Rachel Handler, which I think, Keith, you've actually interviewed her.
Yes,
Yeah.
2 weeks ago.
When she first got to New York, she was a very new amputee. This had been brand new for her. And I recognized myself a little in her, coming into New York, a new amputee, a performer, a singer, a dancer, actor, and all that stuff. And what she has found her way into is the Easter Seals Disability Film Challenge. She started making her own. All of us make our own films, once a year in April, and this has helped people get TV series, films, Marvel hero roles. I mean, it's helped. Nick Novicki did a great service to the business when he came up with this, because he wasn't getting enough work, and he put it out there for everybody. Let's just make 5-minute films. Well, Rachel Handler has excelled at this, and she's written some screenplays as well, which I've done readings of. And she has also, as this young woman who's like half my age, she supported my work. She brought me out to New Jersey to do my show, and I like supporting her work because it's really good stuff. And I think that's been her. She's a great example of younger artists starting out and finding a way to make their voice heard, but also through making their voice heard, they're showing their talents. And she has managed to do that. So she's a good example to look at. And you can look at it online. You can go look her up and see what she's doing. I've seen a lot of deaf actors creating things. Garrett Zurcher. Oh my gosh. He's a director, just got his directing degree at Hunter, and he sees things his own way. And I saw his Philoctetes, deaf version of Philoctetes, the Greek, the guy who was left, he was a warrior who was left on an island because he got injured, and it was like the island of broken toys, basically. and he wrote his own deaf version of it with John McGinty. Oh my God. Anyway, the wonderful actor, John McGinty, the gorgeous actor, did this beautiful thing. People are getting out there. For a long time, Keith, I was by myself in a category by myself. Why would you do a musical about losing a leg, first of all? Why would you continue to be a performer once you've lost a leg? And I went back on stage 4 weeks after I lost my leg doing a show in Boston that had nothing to do with disability with Jacques Brel. Jacques Brel is alive and well and living in Paris was the show. And I was born in a trunk, meaning I was born to be an actor. I was born to do what I do, to direct, to do those. So this is what comes naturally to me. But for everyone who's out there who has, Garrett is writing and collaborating, directing shows here on the East Coast, not Deaf West, creating theater about deaf culture and for deaf and hearing audiences. These are some of the examples. Oh, and of course, Ryan Haddad and Greg Moscala and all these wonderful folks. Monique Holt doing deaf film festivals out in the West Coast. I taught a course at the Dramatists Guild on writing theater, playwriting with disability in mind focus. And I had Monique on and I had Greg on. And all of these wonderful, I push a lot more women, Christine Bruno, people who are out there, not just doing theater, because she's doing Cost of Living right now. Katie Sullivan, who's doing Richard III at Chicago Shakespeare, she's double amputee, and she won awards for Cost of Living here in New York. That's what I do. I advocate and encourage and support this new generation. And sometimes people don't notice who was like doing this for the past 40 years, because that was me. And sometimes people don't realize that there was someone who opened those doors and fought with the Equity League and fought with the Broadway League and came up against casting directors who now thank God they liked me, because now we have a great relationship. But I was pushing the envelope out there in film and television with all the diversity directors of the networks and the film studios, and oftentimes feeling that I was jeopardizing my career by speaking up. But the way I spoke up was, hey, if we work together, you're going to get a bigger audience, because you're going to get the disabled audience and they have money to spend and their sponsors will love them and your commercials and everything. And there'll be money. It's money. You can all make money out of this. And they took that advice and ran with it. And now we see so much more happening. And I did have part of that, just in case anybody didn't know. But that's what I spend my life doing, is encouraging the next generation to take these on. And the doors have been opening. But I've always said to everybody, if you're not getting enough work, like Nick Novicki, if you're not getting enough work, write it yourself and find whatever stage you can find. Find whatever audience you can find. And nowadays, you can do that online. We didn't have that. We didn't have a way of doing that. We had to find a live place to get ourselves out, or make our own film or video and send it out, but it was a different kind of camera. You couldn't just take your phone out and make a film or TikTok or something and then get 1 million likes or go viral. These things did not exist for most of my lifetime. So it was really about showing up at auditions. It still is about showing up at auditions, by the way, for performers. Getting yourself out there. And for me, cabaret was a real foot in the door. And since I only have one foot, it got me in the door. So like here in New York was to take, because I could write songs and got accepted into the BMI musical theater workshop and the ASCAP theater workshop. That was another way. I was taking all these routes just to get to get work. Whatever I could do, show up at auditions, write my own stuff, sing other people's stuff in a cabaret act at Don't Tell Mamas or the Duplex or 88s. Bring in people that I met along the way here at Manhattan Plaza. Thank God I live in Midtown Manhattan at Hell's Kitchen in Manhattan Plaza. Neighbors are all artists, incorporate people into what you do so that people can see your work and so you can get work. And it all really is an effort to get work. Rachel, what were you going to say?
I was going to say, as far as theatrical interpreting and wanting to get into interpreting for musicians or speakers or theater, is look towards your mentors, look towards the people who are already doing it. People like Stephanie Fain in New York, who is this quiet, mighty giant of theatrical interpreting, and ask the questions. One of my interpreting partners from Alaska will email me and say, hey, we just got come from away. How many interpreters do you think we need? How would you sign this? I've got interpreter collaborators in Boise, Idaho, because Great Lakes is sister city with Boise. And so when I interpret a show for Great Lakes, I'll send my notes out to them and say, hey, this show is coming out to you. Here's what I did for this. Or they'll ask, how do you do to be or not to be? Collaborate, find mentors, and just talk to other interpreters and see what they say. And take it or leave it. Sometimes I'll get guidance that it's like, not for me. And that's okay. That's okay. The important thing is to reach out and connect with each other. And I'm going to say one thing that's controversial. Here it comes. Please do not watch the interpreters on YouTube interpreting bands. Just don't watch them. Because it's usually not a really good example. Talk to people who do this and get different opinions. That's my opinion. Get different opinions, see what works for you and what doesn't. And then, of course, work with your deaf audience and see what works for them and what they want. Because some people do want English. Some people do want ASL. It's always going to be different. So just ask the questions.
And when we think mentors, I should mention one mentor. I don't want this to go because I know how it feels when people forget that I had anything to do. But Kitty Lunn, who had the company, who has the company Infinity Dance Theater, way back when I first moved to New York, she noticed that I was in the clubs and I was getting press, and she was like, here's some stuff that, she was a real mentor, and she fought for me sometimes. She put herself in an uncomfortable position sometimes. She uses a wheelchair. She was getting ready to rehearse a Broadway show when she slipped on some ice after doing an episode on a soap opera and never walked again. But she danced, and she has this company. So to me, it's really important to know that you have mentors. And she pushed me into the union, into the committee, into being a leader and all that stuff. And Kitty fought for us the way I fought, that I continue to fight for folks. And she has. And I would be remiss if I didn't mention, when Rachel said mentors, that was like, Kitty.
So what do you hope that people with disabilities take away from this episode? And what do you hope that people who have yet to discover their own disabilities take away from this episode?
I'm going to jump right in and just say, be kind to interpreters. Because we are, in fact, a dying breed. There has been so much controversy and some pushback with interpreters. Well, there was a controversy with an interpreter on Broadway, and that was, I won't even bring it up just because that was the interpreter's fault. However, there are times when an interpreter is not up to snuff. And that, instead of encouraging that interpreter and offering ways to get them up to snuff, there can sometimes be just flat out criticism about their abilities, which makes them quit. And so we're actually losing interpreters now because they're tired of being yelled at. And so if you're at a show, and you see an interpreter and sign language, or you're a deaf patron and that interpreter isn't doing the best work they could do, talk to them, offer help, offer support. Don't just go, wow, that interpreter sucked. No, go up to that interpreter and say, listen, you know what you need? Do some training on facial expression. Do some training on really translating the script. Stop signing English. Really understand, tell the story, be present. Offer encouragement to the theatrical interpreters, because we really do just want to deliver the story. And some are better than others at doing that. So help those who are not good at it yet. Help those who need encouragement. And I would say to those who are thinking about becoming interpreters, take acting classes, take theater training, make that part of your interpreter training. Because even if you're not a theatrical interpreter, nobody wants to sit in a history class watching an interpreter do this for 2 hours with no facial expression. Get some facial expression. You're telling history. So even if it's not straight up theatrical interpreting, when I interpret anthropology or chemistry or, other college classes, I try to engage because I want there to be engagement. So that would be it, is encourage interpreters.
Rachel, the first lesson at the Sign Language Center is that your face is part of your interpretation, that you cannot sign with your hands and not your face. Your face tells the story. I love that part of the training, is that I would suck at the hand stuff, and my teacher would say, but you told the story. You told the story with your face. And she would point it out to everybody. She's really bad with the hand. She's not remembering any of her signs. But did you see, you understood, because she's telling you the story with her face. So, and that was when I was told that actors make the best interpreters, because they do use their face. They do engage their emotions. They engage. It's not one of those skills that you disengage on. It's just not. And I'm glad Rachel mentioned it. The thing that I would like people to take from this, first of all, I would like them to hear all the names that we're mentioning, because some of these people are leaders, and they deserve all the attention. The other thing is self-identification. It's a controversial thing. How can I get an acting job if I've already identified as having autism? How can I get an acting job if I identify that I have an invisible disability that may never come up? How can I get an acting job if I visibly move a certain way, not like anybody else? How is that going to help me if I put that on my resume? How are they're going to look at that and they're going to throw the resume out? Well, not true anymore. I would like to just say not true anymore. If I could tell you how many times casting directors now consult with me to find that person who's right for this role, who's authentically disabled, because they can't find someone. Self-identify. If you're in the union, self-identify. There's a place in the union where you put your account and your details about yourself. Self-identify, because the more of us who have self-identified, the more of us who do say, yes, I have a disability, and this is a boon. This will enhance this character. This will enhance your diversity casting. This will bring in more of an audience. The more you do that, the more we get employed. Eric Grace, double amputee, now a beautiful Black actor. Oh my God, he's so beautiful. And a triple threat. He can sing opera and rock and dance as well. But he's now on, I think it's, Tracker, the new series called Tracker. He's the guy who does all the computer stuff and everything. But the first appearance of him on the series, just about a week ago or two, is him walking on both his artificial legs to his office. We see him on metal, it doesn't have covers like my beautiful, like you can tell these are two artificial legs. He walks down the hall and then he goes into his thing. And then, so that right up front, this is a double amputee. Daryl Chill Mitchell in a wheelchair. I would like to see more women in these roles. And there are deaf women are doing fairly well in New Amsterdam had a deaf doctor who was female. I mean, this is what they're doing to show that their show is diverse. So get in there and tell them you're part of that population. It didn't used to be true. People felt they were shooting themselves in the foot to self-identify. But now I'm on council at Equity, having done my 40 years with SAG-AFTRA and all that. It's like, and I'm realizing, I'm telling people the same thing. Tell people you have something that's unique and different that will add quality to your production, or, so self-identify and self-writing and directing, create your own content, create your own, and find your audience. And nowadays you can find your audience online. It's so lucky. But that's I hope people hear what we're saying, because what Rachel is saying is so valuable in a way that nobody's been talking about that. And with me, I've been shouting this to the rooftops for a long time.
Well, and I want to add on at the end about self-identifying and also making your own product. Russell Harvard is putting out video after video, and it's brilliant and it's beautiful. And I've known Russell a very long time, and it's so exciting to see him just exploding onto social media, and
the
he's a rock
stage
star. So, and the stage.
And film and television. Oh my God, yes.
Well, I want to thank you both, and this episode could easily go another 2 hours without us running out of material. I hope I can get both of you to come back, and I will probably shut up and let you guys just talk, because it's really fantastic and invigorating. Or maybe all my co-hosts should talk. Anyway, I appreciate and admire both of you, and I look forward to seeing both of you in person, hopefully very soon. You two are the musical theater dynamic duo Lights in My Eyes, and I wish you both all the best.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Keith, for the time and your patience. Thank you.
Take care.